We are continuing on with Chapter 3, Sensation and Perception. This is now Part 2.
Our sense of taste is intimately linked to our sense of smell. Olfaction allows us to perceive many of the subtle flavors of the food we eat, which allows us to enjoy the process of eating and encourages adequate calorific intake. Initially, the visual and olfactory senses allow us to judge the quality of food we put into our mouths. Still, taste ultimately determines whether that food is chewed or swallowed. Taste allows us to detect overly salty food or food that may have been spoiled and detect some noxious and potentially toxic materials placed in the mouth. The olfactory bulb is a bulb-like ending on the olfactory nerve in the anterior region of each cerebral hemisphere. This first synapse in the olfactory system picks up excitation from the nose, specifically from the cilia in the olfactory epithelium. The olfactory bulbs are thought to act as filters, masking information about many common background odors while enhancing the transmission of new or key odors. Destruction of the olfactory bulbs leads to diminished or complete absence of the sense of smell, anosmia. Interestingly, research conducted by Weiss and Company in 2020 demonstrated that not everyone has olfactory bulbs. MRI scans show that olfactory bulbs are absent in around 0.6% of all women and 4.25% of left-handed women. Despite this absence, these women exhibit an acute sense of smell, suggesting that an olfactory bulb may not be essential to olfaction in all people. Then you have the olfactory nerve. This is the first cranial nerve that carries sensory fibers that are concerned with the sense of smell. It derives from the olfactory lobe and is distributed to olfactory receptors in the nasal mucous membrane. It is also called the cranial nerve. The olfactory tract is a complex network of axonal bundles surrounded by granule cells extending from the olfactory bulb to the anterior olfactory nucleus and other regions of the brain. It plays a crucial role in processing odors and is connected to the amygdala, a key center for olfactory perception. The olfactory cortex is the portion of the cerebral cortex that deals with the sense of smell. It is part of the cerebrum and consists of several areas. The olfactory cortex is a structurally distinct cortical region on the ventral surface of the forebrain. Olfactory memory is defined as the ability to remember and recognize smells through a distributed neural network in the brain, involving secondary and tertiary odor processing regions influenced by the learning tasks, nature, and parameters, as well as temporal configurations for memory consolidation. Odor plays a crucial role in our perception of the environment. It is a primary sensory input for detecting potential dangers, identifying food sources, influencing social interactions, and triggering powerful memories due to its close connection with the brain regions responsible for emotion and memory formation. Essentially, smell provides vital information about our surroundings and can significantly impact our behavior and well-being. Some of the key functions of odor are, again, food selection. Here, we identify edible foods by their pleasant smells while avoiding spoiled food with unpleasant odors. Danger detection allows the brain to warn us of potential hazards through distinct smells, such as smoke, gas leaks, or toxic substances. Then there is social communication. Smell contributes to attraction and social bonding through body odor, which can signal pheromones and individual characteristics. Odor also plays a role in memory recall. There is a strong association with memories and smells due to the close neural connections between the olfactory system and the hippocampus, often triggering vivid past experiences when encountering a familiar scent. We must not forget how odor influences one's emotions. Depending on the odor, It can cause positive or negative emotions, potentially impacting mood and well-being. We discussed the various components of our olfactory system. Now, let's review our tastes. Taste is the sense devoted to detecting molecules dissolved in liquids, called gustation, or the sensory experience resulting from perceiving gustatory qualities. Dissolved molecules are delivered to the taste receptors, taste cells, on the tongue, soft palate, larynx, and pharynx. Of the proposed 5 primary tastes, 3 are dedicated to detecting nutrients: sweet, sugars, salty, sodium, and umami, proteins, and 2 are for protection: sour, from unripe or spoiled foods, and bitter, from toxins. Taste combines with smell, texture, and appearance to generate a sense of flavor. Taste receptor cells. Each taste bud has 50 to 150 taste receptor cells. These cells contain receptors that extend upward inside the taste pore. These extensions are taste hairs called microvilli. The microvilli come into contact with the chemicals in your food and drink. Taste buds are sensory organs that allow you to taste and identify what you are eating or drinking. Taste buds are located on the tongue inside the papillae, which are the small bumps on the tongue. They analyze the chemical makeup of food and drink to determine whether it is safe to digest and tastes good or bad. Taste buds consist of 50 to 100 cells, including type 1, 2, and 3. These cells interact with each other during gustatory stimulation. They use microscopic hairs called microvilli, which send messages to the brain about how something tastes. The average lifespan of a taste bud is approximately 10 days, and we possess an average of around 10,000 taste buds. Unfortunately, some taste buds no longer generate as we age, so that older people may have fewer working taste buds. Smoking can also damage and reduce a person's taste buds. However, within 48 hours of quitting smoking, the senses of taste and smell will recover. Although the taste buds are impaired, they start to heal and food begins to taste better. It's time to discuss the largest sensory organ on our body, skin, or cutaneous senses. Our skin senses include sensations when the skin comes into contact with external objects or forces. These sensations result from receptors in the skin that relay information to the central nervous system. The skin has many types of sensory receptors, including mechanoreceptors. These receptors detect touch, pressure, and when the skin is stretched. Then there are thermoreceptors, which detect heat and cold. We also have pain receptors, which I will discuss shortly. Proprioceptors, which detect limb movement and position, are also receptors. Additionally, the skin's sensory receptors directly detect information about the stimulus's intensity, duration, and position. The somatosensory cortex, located in the brain, decodes information into physical sensations. Our skin senses are very complex organs, and they are thought to have 4 submodalities: tactile, thermal, painful, and pruritic, itch. There is also evidence of a 5th modality that conveys the favorable affective properties of touch. The skin's sense of touch gives our brains a wealth of information about the natural environment, including temperature, humidity, and air pressure. Most importantly, this sense of touch allows us to feel physical pain, which is necessary for avoiding injury, disease, and danger. It is amazing how much information we receive about the world through our sense of touch. Although we still don't know all the details of how the skin perceives touch, what we know is fascinating. I mentioned on the last slide that our skin has pain receptors. These receptors are an alarm system, so to speak. They let our bodies know when something is wrong. One theory from Canadian psychologist Robert Melzack in 1965 was gate control theory. This hypothesis suggested that the subjective experience of pain is regulated by large nerve fibers in the spinal cord that act as gates, which means that pain is not just a simple transmission of stimulation from the skin or some internal organ to the brain. Instead, these sensations stemming from noxious stimulation impinging on pain receptors must pass through these spinal gates to the brain to emerge as pain perceptions. However, the gates are impacted by various influences, including drugs, injuries, our emotions, as well as our brain attempting to nullify anything perceived as painful. This can operate to shut them down, preventing the pain transmission or causing them to be fully open, thus facilitating transmission. Kinesthetic sense, also known as kinesthesia or kinesthetic awareness, is the ability to perceive our body's position and movement without sight. This sense is difficult to describe and is often underappreciated in daily life. We tend to take it for granted. The kinesthetic sense consists of sensory receptors throughout the body, especially proprioceptors, which detect the position and movement of joints and limbs. We use this sense when practicing physical activities such as walking, running, driving, dancing, and swimming. Some significant facets of the kinesthetic sense include muscle memory and hand-eye coordination. Muscle vibration is often used to study the kinesthetic sense. For example, vibrating the elbow flexors can create the sensation of extending the forearm, while vibrating the extensors can create the feeling of flexing the forearm. Our vestibular senses, also known as the balance senses, are a set of sensory systems in the inner ear that contribute to our sense of balance, spatial awareness, and motion. The vestibular system converts the physical forces of gravity and acceleration into neurological impulses that tell us whether we are moving or standing still. It is located in the vestibule, a part of the inner ear attached to the cochlea. The vestibule contains two organs, the semicircular canals and the otoliths. How it interacts with other systems. The vestibular system works with other sensory systems to help us understand our body's position in space, maintain stability, and move confidently through our environment. The vestibular senses influence how we interact with the world, shape our behavior, and color how we experience our environment. Now that we have discussed sensations, let's talk about the principles of perception. Perception refers to how we experience the world through our senses. We use our senses to become aware of objects, relationships, and events. Through this experience, we gain information about our environment. Our perception is a complex process that relies on our cognitive functions to process information. Memory is key in this process, helping us recognize a friend's face or detect a familiar scent. Through this intricate process, we can identify and respond to environmental stimuli. Perception is a comprehensive system that includes the five senses: touch, sight, sound, smell, and taste. It also encompasses proprioception, a lesser known aspect that enables us to detect changes in body position and movement, enriching our understanding of perception. At any given moment, many stimuli surround us. Perception, our reliable filter, allows us to exist within and interpret the world without becoming overwhelmed by this abundance of stimuli, providing reassurance in our ability to navigate it. Selective attention is a crucial cognitive process that enables a person to choose and concentrate on specific input for further processing, while effectively suppressing irrelevant or distracting information. Understanding this concept is key to comprehending how we process data. Selective attention is essential because attention is a limited resource. Without it, it would be impossible to focus on every environmental stimulus. For example, while driving, it is important to focus on the actions of other cars rather than slight variations in the asphalt color. Selective attention is a powerful cognitive tool that filters out distracting information and highlights relevant data. This process, which can occur in various ways, is instrumental in helping us stay focused and attentive. We use dichotic listening, a process where we attend to only one information channel, typically in a situation where different information is presented to each ear. Then, there is visual search, where we find the target features within a visual image. Last, we can distinguish categories by identifying diagnostic features within a stimulus. When it comes to our perceptions of the world, it's easy to think that what we see is what we get. However, research reveals a more complex truth. Our perception of the world, through all our senses, is heavily influenced and biased by our past experiences. These experiences, along with our expectations, motivations, beliefs, emotions, and culture, all play a significant role in shaping how we perceive the world. Consider the last time you started a new class. Did you have any expectations at the outset that might have influenced your experience in the class? If you expect a class to be boring, are you more likely to be uninterested in class? This is a prime example of how our expectations can shape our experiences, often leading us to confirm our initial beliefs. In the field of psychology, this phenomenon is known as a perceptual set. It's a term that refers to our tendency to perceive and interpret information in a way that aligns with our preconceptions and expectations. Thus, a perceptual set can be viewed as a temporary readiness to perceive particular objects or events rather than others. For example, a person driving a car has a perceptual set to identify anything in the car or on the road that might affect their safety. How can we become aware of our own perceptual sets and biases? What are the implications of perceptual sets in daily decision making? How do different cultures influence our perceptual sets and interpretations of the same events? Bottom-up processing explains perceptions that start with an incoming stimulus and work upward until a representation of the object is formulated in our minds. This process suggests that our perceptual experience is based entirely on sensory stimuli that we piece together using only data from our senses. To understand the world, we must take energy from the environment and convert it to neural signals, a process known as sensation. With their remarkable ability to interpret these sensory signals, our brains play a key role in the next step of the process, perception. According to the American Psychological Association in 2018, bottom-up processing is not just a theoretical concept, but a practical tool. In information processing, incoming stimulus data initiate and determine the higher-level processes involved in their recognition, interpretation, and categorization. For example, in vision, features are combined into objects and objects into scenes, and recognition is based only on the information in the stimulus input. Typically, perceptual or cognitive mechanisms use bottom-up processing when information is unfamiliar or highly complex. It is also called bottom-up analysis or data-driven processing. Top-down processing is also information processing in which an overall hypothesis about or general conceptualization of a stimulus is applied to and influences the analysis of incoming stimulus data. For example, in reading, knowledge about letter and word frequencies, syntax, and other regularities in language guides the recognition of incoming information. In this type of processing, a person's higher level knowledge, concepts, or expectations influence the processing of lower level information. For example, let us look at a proofreader's illusion. This is when a visual error in which a misspelling, omission, extra letter, transposition, or the like is overlooked, owing to top-down processing in which the context and other cues outweigh the impact of the word or phrase as spelled or misspelled. Typically, perceptual or cognitive mechanisms use top-down processing when information is familiar and not incredibly complex. It is also called conceptually driven processing or top-down analysis. Alternatively, rather than interpreting the world solely based on the information we gather from our senses, the brain uses pre-existing concepts, ideas, and knowledge to comprehend sensory input. This is top-down processing. The aforementioned contrasts with bottom-up processing, where perception starts with the sensory input and works upwards to a higher level understanding. In top-down processing, our higher level knowledge and expectations shape our perception and interpretation of the sensory input. Our environment constantly provides sensory information, but our brains have limited attentional and processing resources. Top-down processing is a crucial tool for perception, enabling us to interpret and understand our environment quickly. This adaptability in processing familiar and less complex information reassures us of our cognitive abilities, allowing us to make decisions and provide answers swiftly when needed. Perceptual organization, the process of structuring visual and other sensory information elements into a coherent whole, is a concept deeply rooted in psychology and art theory. According to traditional Gestalt psychology, the parts of a group are organized to form whole figures that constitute more than the parts separately. Later research more precisely defined the properties that enable such organized tasks. Artists have traditionally used the principles of perceptual organization to create desired moods or feelings and challenge viewers' expectations, demonstrating the power of art to provoke thought. The figure ground principle is a key concept in perceptual organization. It relates to the principle that perceptions have two parts: a figure or object that stands out in pleasing contours, such as a person in a crowd, and an indistinct, homogeneous background, like the crowd itself. This principle helps us understand how we visually separate objects from their surroundings, a crucial aspect of perceptual organization. The laws of grouping in psychology, also known as the Gestalt laws of grouping, are not just theoretical concepts. They are the principles governing how we perceive and interpret the world daily. Developed by German psychologists, the Gestalt principles, known as the Gestalt laws of perceptual organization, describe how we interpret the complex world. They explain why a series of flashing lights appears to be moving, or why we can read a sentence with words that are either misspelled or out of place. These principles have practical applications in design, marketing, and everyday life, making them a fascinating area of study. The 6 Gestalt principles or laws are: the law of similarity states that similar things tend to appear grouped. Grouping can occur in both auditory and visual stimuli. The law of pregnance, sometimes called the law of simplicity, states that when presented with ambiguous or complex objects, the brain will make them appear as simple as possible. This fascinating aspect of our brain's functioning is a testament to its efficiency and adaptability. According to the law of proximity, things close together seem more related than things spaced farther apart. A computational model for the Gestalt proximity principle on dot patterns and beyond, put another way, when objects are close, we tend to group them together. The law of continuity holds that points connected by straight or curving lines are seen in a way that follows the smoothest path. In other words, elements in a line or curve seem more related to one another than those positioned randomly. We perceive elements as belonging to the same group if they seem to complete some entity. Our brains often ignore contradictory information and fill in information gaps. That is the law of closure. The Gestalt law of common region says that when elements are located in the same closed region, we perceive them as belonging to the same group. Perceptual constancy is when an object or its properties, e.g., size, shape, color, appear unchanged despite variations in the stimulus itself or in the external conditions of observation, such as object orientation or illumination level. It allows people to recognize objects in different conditions, such as when viewed from various angles, distances, or lighting. For instance, a car remains the same size and shape whether viewed up close or from a distance, in bright sunlight or under a streetlight. Similarly, a red apple appears red under natural and artificial light, demonstrating color constancy. Perceptual constancy depends on how familiar an object is to an observer and the number of environmental cues available to help identify it. If someone has limited experience with an object or fewer environmental cues to help identify it, their perceptual constancy reduces. Perceptual constancy heavily influences the environmental cues surrounding us in its various forms. These cues can either aid or hinder our ability to perceive objects accurately. For instance, shape constancy, the ability to perceive an object as having the same shape, despite changes in its shape on the retina, is greatly influenced by the viewing angle and the environmental cues present. Then you have size constancy, the ability to perceive an object as the same size, even though its retinal image changes depending on its distance from the observer. With color constancy, there is the tendency to perceive a familiar object as having the same color under different illumination conditions. For example, a red apple will be perceived as red in well or poorly illuminated surroundings. Last, you have brightness constancy, the tendency to perceive a familiar object as having the same brightness under different illumination conditions. For example, a piece of white paper has a similar brightness in daylight as at dusk, even though the energy it reflects may differ. Perceptual constancy is a fundamental concept in our understanding of the world. It is crucial for our ability to comprehend and navigate our surroundings. It is also the basis for perceptual learning, allowing us to adapt and understand the world. According to the American Psychological Association, depth perception is the awareness of three-dimensionality, solidity, and the distance between the observer and the object. We accomplish this through cues such as atmospheric perspective, motion parallax, visual accommodation, binocular disparity, and convergence. One study that provided an example is the visual cliff. It is an apparatus used to investigate the development of depth perception in nonverbal human infants and non-human animals, mainly to determine whether depth perception is an innate ability or learned through visual motor experience. The apparatus consists of a table with a checkerboard pattern dropping steeply down a cliff to a surface with the same pattern some distance below the tabletop. The participant is positioned at the border between the tabletop and the cliff. Their reluctance to crawl onto the surface covering the cliff is a clear indication of their ability to discern the apparent depth difference between the two sides of the apparatus. What's surprising is that most infants as young as 6 months of age will not cross to the side over the cliff, demonstrating the power of this experiment at such a tender age. Motion perception, the ability to interpret and perceive the movement of objects, including our own body, and to guide the movement of our eyes and hands, is not just a scientific concept. It is a fundamental part of our visual experience, crucial for everyday tasks, such as driving a car and avoiding collisions. Understanding its significance can make our daily activities more intriguing and engaging. Motion perception, a complex process, relies on visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive inputs. The brain, particularly the visual system, marvels at detecting and processing motion. It uses a network of regions, including the V5-V5A complex in the lateral occipitotemporal cortex, to contribute to different aspects of motion perception. This intricate system is a fascinating area of study in neuroscience and psychology. While several neurological conditions can impair motion perception, there is hope. As people age, their brains can become less adept at suppressing background noise and reacting quickly to movement in the foreground. However, with the proper training, the brain can improve its ability to detect motion. This potential for improvement is a reason for optimism in neuroscience and psychology. Optical illusions, more appropriately known as visual illusions, are all about visual deception. Thanks to the arrangement of images, the effect of colors, the impact of the light source, or other variables, someone can observe a wide range of intriguing and misleading visual effects. While fun and fascinating, optical illusions are also a rich source of knowledge about how the brain and perceptual system function. Here are some of the most informative and engaging optical illusions. The Muller-Lyer optical illusion is a classic optical illusion that stumps many people. Which line is longer? Both are the same length. The Ponzo illusion involves placing two lines over an illustration of a railroad track. Which line is longer? In reality, they are the same length. Illusory distance modulates the perceived size of the afterimage despite the disappearance of depth cues. This optical illusion occurs because people view the scene from a linear perspective. Since the vertical lines look like they are getting closer together, the viewer interprets the top line as further off in the distance. As we wrap up sensation and perception, we will look into a couple of controversial areas. First, let's examine subliminal perception, which involves registering stimuli below the level of awareness, particularly stimuli that are too weak or too rapid for an individual to consciously perceive. Much debate has focused on whether responses to subliminal stimuli actually occur and whether subliminal commands or advertising messages can influence behavior. Experimental evidence indicates that subliminal commands may not directly affect behavior, but may prime later responses. Finally, we have extrasensory perception, or ESP. Some claim to be aware of external events through means other than the known sensory channels. ESP includes telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. Despite considerable research, the existence of any of these modalities remains highly controversial. It is also called paranormal cognition. Okay, so we are finished with Chapter 3. As always, if you do not understand something, please send a message to me in the inbox on Canvas. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.